they don't know what to do with.
The data must be put into a special binary code consisting only of ones and zeros. And you have to give the computer instructions, also in code, to tell it exactly what to do with the data and in what order. These instructions are called a program. In the early days, you put in the instructions by flipping switches or loaded them from paper tape. This was called machine language. It made computers a pain to use. Even worse, every type of computer spoke a different machine language.
While the ENIAC could compute the 30-second trajectory of a shell in 20 seconds, operators required 2 days to program it to do so.
Then a U.S. Navy captain named Grace Hopper solved the problem. She invented a computer language, English words that the computer itself could translate into binary code. Now users could type whole lists of instructions into a computer rather than flipping those damn switches. Like most things having to do with computers, that first language had a silly name, COBOL. It was followed by other languages like Fortran and BASIC, and they all made computing just a bit more user-friendly. So when some nerd tells you he's been up all night programming or writing software or hacking code, what he really means is he's been typing long lists of instructions into his computer.
Mainframe computers were far from personal. They sat in big air-conditioned rooms at insurance companies, phone companies, and the bank, and their main function was to get us confused with some other guy named Cringely, who was a deadbeat and had a criminal record. Eventually, computer terminals did begin to appear in some schools, but most of us paid no attention. But there was usually one kid who did pay attention, falling in love with the digital purity of those ones and zeros. He was the nerd.
And I took this book home that described the PDP-8 computer, and it was just like a Bible to me. I mean, all these things that for some reason I'd fallen in love with, like you might fall in love with a card game called Magic, or you might fall in love with doing crossword puzzles or something else, or playing a musical instrument. I fell in love with these little descriptions of computers on their inside, and it was a little mathematics. I could work out some problems on paper and solve it and see how it's done, and I could come up with my own solutions and feel good inside.
So you would keyboard these commands in, and then you would wait for a while, and then the thing would go and it would tell you something out. But even with that, it was still remarkable, especially for a 10-year-old, that you could write a program in BASIC, let's say, or Fortran, and actually this machine would sort of take your idea and it would sort of execute your idea and give you back some results. And if they were the results that you predicted, your program really worked. It was an incredibly thrilling experience.
Nerds wanted their own computers right from the beginning, but it took a technological breakthrough to make that possible.
This is it, the chip, the microprocessor. This is what allows you to have a mainframe computer on your desk. In the 1950s, mainframes were as big as this garage, and that's because they were filled with thousands of these vacuum tubes or valves. Eventually, the valves were made much smaller and replaced with transistors. Still too big, however, to make a computer that could fit on your desk. What that took was further miniaturization. Here we have a single piece of silicon etched with thousands of transistors. This microprocessor holds more than 1 million transistors, and that's the secret of the personal computer. And that's why they call it Silicon Valley, not Computer Valley.
These are the people who invented the microprocessor, Intel. Intel was started 28 years ago by a handful of guys after a row with their old boss. Their microprocessors today power 85% of the world's computers.
RTS table?
Intel not only invented the chip, they are responsible for the laid-back Silicon Valley working style. Everyone was on a first-name basis. There were no reserved parking places, no offices, only cubicles. It's still true today. Here's the chairman's cubicle.
Knock, knock. Yeah, I've knocked on the door, but there's no door.
Gordon Moore is one of the Intel founders, worth $3 billion. With money like that, I'd have a door.
In a business like this, the people with the power are the ones that have the understanding of what's going on, not necessarily the ones on top. It's very important that those people that have the knowledge are the ones that make the decisions. So we set up something where everyone who had the knowledge had an equal say in what was going on.
Intel's microprocessors kept getting more powerful. They soon had enough horsepower to run a whole computer. Only Intel didn't appreciate the brilliance of their own product, seeing it as useful mainly for calculators or traffic lights. Intel had all the elements necessary to invent the PC business, but they just didn't get it. Lucky for us, someone did. This is the chip that launched the personal computer revolution. This is the magazine that announced it. In January 1975, featured on the cover was the world's first personal computer, the Altair 8800. It was the crazy idea of an ex-Air Force officer from Georgia, Ed Roberts.
If you look at it, you know, it was kind of a grandiose, almost megalomaniac kind of scheme, you know. And right now I couldn't do it because I could see right off there's no way you could do this. There isn't any way you could do this. But at that time, you know, we just lacked the benefits of age and experience. We didn't know we couldn't do it.
20 years after Ed Roberts' flash of brilliance, this exhibit is being held to celebrate the anniversary of the Altair. Like every other PC pioneer, Ed built his computer just because he wanted one to play with.
There were some of us that lusted after computers, really, at that time. All the computers in the world tended to be in big centers, and you had to get permission to get close to them, and it was, you know, nobody had access to computers then. And the idea that you could have your own computer and do whatever you wanted to with it, whenever you wanted to, was fantastic.
And where was all this happening? It was far from Silicon Valley, Intel, or IBM. Out in the desert near the airport in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Ed Roberts ran a calculator company called MITS. Having an ugly building wasn't its only problem. MITS was going bankrupt. Nobody was buying calculators, and Ed needed $65,000 just to stay afloat.
And we went to the bank and had a late night meeting, and the issue was whether we closed MITS down or they loaned us an additional $65,000. And I was asked how many machines that I think we would sell in the next year after it was introduced. And I said 800, and was considered a wild-eyed optimist at that. Within a month after it was introduced, we were getting 250 orders a day. Started about 6.
The Altair wasn't even a computer. It was a computer kit.
Whoa, this is a pretty well-equipped machine.
You had to build it yourself, and even then it usually didn't work. Still, the demand was amazing.
And there were actually people that came to MITS, a couple people with camper trailers, and camped out in the parking lot waiting for their machine. I mean, they were so eager.
I mean, I think everybody had sort of daydreamed, or Walter Mitty, about owning a computer. The surprise was that it would be possible for the average college student, for example, who was living on bare subsistence, to actually buy a computer.
This is what really amazed me, was that people were so, there was a sort of a pent-up demand for having your own computer.
And if it could be that cheap, what a wonderful thing.
This is an Altair computer, the first personal computer. And not just any Altair. This is Altair serial number 2, the second one made. The first Altair made was sent off to be photographed at a magazine and was lost in the mail. So this is the oldest personal computer in the world. Pretty historic junk, but the question is, what do you do with it? I mean, it has a front panel with switches that you can click back and forth and some lights, but in the back, there's no place to connect a keyboard, there's no place to connect a monitor, there's no place to connect a printer. In fact, there's practically nothing at all that you can really do with this thing. But back then, 1975, the people who had it were thrilled.
The nerds formed clubs to talk about their new toy. One of the first was the Homebrew Computer Club, which met on Wednesday evenings in a hall rented from Stanford University in Silicon Valley. Presiding over Near Anarchy was Lee Felsenstein, who pretended to be in charge.
I would start the meeting by making a horrendous loud noise because everyone was talking and I had to get some attention somehow. And I would use it to call on the person in question. I'd make threatening gestures with it. Most of us were in the electronics industry to a certain extent. There was also a stratum of